Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Again, my name is John Richan, and I'm the digital archivist at the Concordia University Records Management and Archives Department. And thank you to the selection committee for giving me the opportunity to present this project today. So I'd like to begin with acknowledging that Concordia University is located on the unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanakahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jajoki, Montreal, is commonly known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So today, like the title suggests, I'm going to be speaking a bit about a really rewarding project that our department worked on last year to breathe some new life into the Concordia University digitized archival publication collection. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that's what I'll be calling it. And this project looked at both the preservation side of things, so looking at digital preservation and how we were doing that, while at the same time aiming to make these resources accessible. So I'll start today with speaking a little bit more about our departmental context here at Records Management and Archives at Concordia, a little bit about our digital preservation strategy, as well as a kind of a newish departmental internal working group that was formed in the early part of 2021 last year. And this group actually went on to manage this project. Next, I'll move on to speak a little bit about the project itself, a little more context about the project and the why of the project. So why did we take this project on? I'll go over some of the challenges that were facing us before we started the project. Following that, I'll speak to the solutions that we ended up implementing for this project. So both Archivematica and the Internet Archive to grant access. Following that, I'll get into a brief project timeline to give everyone an idea about how long this project took, the scale of the project from start to finish, and then some of the key milestones that we achieved along the way. Following that, I'll look at a high-level project workflow, so not getting into too many of the technical details, but just kind of a high-level snapshot of the workflow. And then also touching on the roles that everyone on the project team played to give an idea about how the project actually rolled out. And then I'm going to finally wrap up this presentation with some of the anticipated and unanticipated outcomes that we came across during the process of the project. So I'll start off a little bit, not talking specifically about the project itself, but I'll talk a little bit more about the context of our department here at Concordia and situate our department within the larger university community. So the Archives has the responsibility to preserve and make accessible the historical records related to Concordia University and its two founding institutions. So those being both Loyola College and Sir George Williams. Our department manages over 15,000 boxes of both semi-active and permanent analog records. And we also manage over 100,000 digital records currently, which account for just over 2 terabytes of data in our digital preservation environment. And note just to say that this number is growing every single day. Our department manages and supports records management activities at the university. We run training sessions, and we also facilitate archival research, just to name a few other of our services. So moving on a little bit now to more the digital side of things. So in 2018, our department published our digital preservation strategy with the support of both the University Archivist and the Secretary General. So just very briefly, the strategy helps to define our digital preservation program at a very high level, while at the same time it reestablishes our commitment to the ongoing preservation and accessibility of our digital archives and digital holdings. From a more technical perspective, our strategy also highlights our commitment to following the Open Archival Information System, or the OIS reference model for digital preservation. Through both our strategy and the strategic directions of the university, we have been able to advocate and take on new projects with a digital focus in the last few years. Moving on to the last point on the slide, and finally, and I think most importantly, in regards to this project I'll be speaking about shortly, in January 2021, we formed a departmental working group called the Digital Preservation and Access Working Group. So this group was made up of 5 staff members at the archive. So myself, the digital archivist, an archivist, records management analyst, an archives technician, and an archives assistant. Again, at a high level, this group was kind of charged to find solutions for tackling various digital preservation and access questions that had arisen at the archives just sort of prior to the start of the pandemic, and also sort of during the pandemic and still going on to today, while staff is still working from home and working in a hybrid work environment. The other motivation, and kind of tying into the theme of this presentation, to start this group was a general feeling of disconnect between the digital preservation community and those charged with granting access or curating digital collections of a historical nature. So this feeling kind of arose over the last few years after attending the IPRES conference, which focuses on digital preservation, as well as the Big Curator Users Forum. There's a great focus in these communities on digital preservation and preservation in general, but rarely was I seeing it kind of being aligned with making digital material, digital resources accessible in a consistent fashion. So now on to a bit more of the project. So now that we have some of that context out of the way, I'll talk about the project in a bit more detail. So starting in 2014, the archives started putting an emphasis on the digitization of university, Loyola College, and Sir George Williams publications. So this is things like calendars, university calendars, institutional newspapers, annual reports. So those types of documents. And again, just to mention that Loyola College and Sir George Williams were 2 of the founding institutions that merged to form Concordia University in 1974. So the archives here at Concordia also acts as the official repository for these collections. So just as a bit of a snapshot, since 2014, our department's digitized over 2,100 issues, stored them locally, and made accessible these issues and these publications through our archives website. So all of this was fantastic to have these often requested digital archival items digitized and accessible. But over time, we started to notice that certain challenges emerged linked to sort of the ongoing digital preservation of these digitized files, as well as granting access to these materials. So the first challenge I'm going to speak about a little bit has to do with how we were storing this multitude of digital items and the locations that they were being stored at across different locations at the archives. So even within the short time span of 8 years, we had gone from storing this digitized material locally on the computer that was hooked up to the scanner to various network drives that had been deployed over time, to Documentum as an electronic records management system, SharePoint, and we also found that these digitized materials were finding their way onto things like optical media, so like CDs and external hard drives. So after 8 years, basically, it had become very unintentionally messy to manage. So this was the first challenge that we wanted to tackle and fix this problem. The second challenge that we wanted to touch on was, even though that it was true that these publications were accessible on our website, over time, there were certain limitations to these publications being hosted on our website for both us as archivists as well as for researchers. So one example of this limitation was that it was not actually possible to search across the entire collection. You sort of had to know where something was already to be able to locate it in the collection. Individual PDFs were OCR'd, however, there was no functionality, again, to search across the collection, a publication run, or the entire collection. Likewise, there was really no functionality to sort and to browse this digitized material by year of publication or by the creator. And the second challenge had to do with visibility. And again, that this collection was really buried on our website. The visibility was not great for first-time researchers looking to get access to this material. And like with the sort of the searchability limitation, you kind of had to know that these publications were on our website to find them. So we wanted to break through both these access limitations and these digital preservation challenges, I guess, to make this collection more visible to the research community. So now I'll speak a little bit about the solutions that we ended up using to be able to come up with a solution for these challenges. So in late 2018, the archives here at Concordia started using Archivematica as our digital preservation system with linked hosted cloud-based storage. So we now had a way to create standardized archival information packages, or AIPs, if we follow the OAS reference model vocabulary, with our digital objects and corresponding metadata. And all of this is now verifiable through fixity checks, something that we do 4 times a year across all of our holdings in our digital preservation environment. This fixity check really just helps us verify that no bits of data have been altered over time. Using Archivematica also gave us this streamlined and automated way to normalize files for preservation. And this indeed was actually a feature that we took advantage of during this specific project in order to create preservation copies of these digitized publications. So with this solution already in place since 2018, it was kind of a no-brainer for us that we would use the system for the preservation of this digitized publication collection. So solution number 2 for us was a little bit more challenging for the working group. We had to do a bit of digging and a bit of research to come up with sort of a new access platform to be able to grant kind of a new way to access this material and to promote a greater visibility of this collection. So the archives here, Records Management Archives, alongside with special collections at the Concordia Library, uses Atom to provide access to our archival holdings. However, in this situation, the working group kind of concluded that for this specific project, we would actually like to look elsewhere. And this primarily comes back to just sort of the large volume and the size of the PDF files that we were looking to upload and sort of re-grant access to in a new way. So the group spent some time in early 2021 looking at how other Canadian university libraries and university archives were using the Internet Archive. And we really liked what we saw. In our research, we really focused on 3 institutions that were making similar archival material accessible using the Internet Archive. And we were impressed how they sort of scaled up their efforts to be able to provide access to a lot of material. So these institutions were Carleton University in Ottawa, Queen's University, and McGill University. So in the end, as I mentioned, we went forward with the Internet Archive to create 3 new collections that would respect the provenance of these 3 different publication collections, I guess we can call it. So we created a Concordia University publication collection, a Loyola College of Montreal collection, and a Sir George Williams collection in the Internet Archive. So now that we had these solutions in place and in mind, it was time to go to work on this project. So next, I'll just go over a quick project timeline. Some of this I've kind of alluded to, and some of this I'll speak to a bit more in the next slide. But just wanted to kind of map out some of these project milestones that we hit along the way. So as I mentioned, in early 2021, the working group was formed. The goal again was try and align our digital preservation projects and access outcomes in a more succinct fashion going forward. So in April and May 2021, the project was proposed and approved by the University Archivist. There was a real focus in the scope of this project to really focus on the preservation and making accessible, again, sort of the publications that were already accessible on our website. So we weren't looking at adding any new publications at this time into the scope of this project. And this was largely due to the fact that we knew that we already were the copyright owners of this material. And so at this sort of like pilot project, this project, we wouldn't get into that situation of answering copyright questions. So the next step was the verification of the digitized material, which started in May, not long after the approval of the project. I'll speak to that step on the next slide. Similarly, in June, we began packaging and preparing the material for ingest into Archivematica. So again, I'll talk about that a bit more on the next slide. Into July and August last year, we had our 3 new collections created by the Internet Archive. So this was, again, the Concordia collection, the Loyola collection, and the Sir George Williams collection. A big chunk of the time between July and November 2021, this is when we were doing the actual uploading of the digital objects, as well as the metadata entry in the Internet Archive. In November, after the project had wrapped up, we redirected the links from our website to the Internet Archive and removed the old links from the archive's website to the old hosted PDF files on our website. And then finally, just a few months ago in February, we did a big cleanup of all the extra copies in various locations. And this, we're kind of a rough estimate that this freed up at minimum 300 to 400 gigabytes worth of data across all these different locations that they were stored. So now we have a nice clean way and a nice clean location in Archivematica that holds our preservation copies, and the Internet Archive holds our access copy. So all said, this is sort of a much cleaner approach. So now to get into a little bit more detail, but not to get into all the details. So the first step in this project was the pre-ingest verification. So I alluded to that on the last slide. So again, this was started right after the project was approved. The task was carried out by our records management analyst and an archives technician. So basically what this step of the project entailed was a pretty large inventory that was created to determine basically what was where were all these files across our network drives, on people's local like C drives, SharePoint sites, external hard drives, etc. So we verified the digitized issues against what we already had on our website, just to make sure that everything was covered. And also we checked in each file just to make sure that there were no pages missing, that there were a few instances where cover pages were missing. So we just wanted to make sure that everything was there. So that was sort of the pre-ingest verification, the first step of the workflow. So the second step kind of bumped down to the digital object modification. So this only happened if it was required. So as I mentioned, like there were a number of issues that were missing pages, or in a few cases, we were actually, for some reason, for some reason missing like an entire issue of something. In other cases, we were missing a title page, a cover page on some of these issues. So this stage was really making sure that everything was like in good, organized, kind of a finalized copy before we prepared it to go into our, before really packaging it up and getting it ready to ingest into Archivematica. So the next step was doing the actual packaging, ingest, and ape creation in Archivematica. So this was carried out by myself and the archives assistant here at RMA. So this really involved looking at the number of issues within a publication run, because we really wanted to store sort of manageable apes within Archivematica. We didn't want some apes being really humongous and then other apes only holding one issue. We wanted to kind of weigh out the size of our apes, I guess you can say. So in most cases, the older publications with fewer issues, we were able to include sort of a decade's worth of issues within one ape, whereas with more modern, more recent publication runs, sometimes we would have just 1 year worth of issues within an ape. So after these publications and issues were packaged up, we uploaded them to our Archivematica SFTP server and readied it for processing in Archivematica. As the Archivematica ingest was starting to roll out in June 2021, we decided to create a processing XML file in order to automate the process and ape creation within Archivematica. This option was available to us as a solution because every single one of these apes that we were creating for preservation in Archivematica was really being processed the same way. So we had the luxury of creating this processing file that kind of takes out some of the more manual process of working in Archivematica. And finally, unfortunately, we did not have an automated way to integrate Archivematica and the Internet Archive part of this project. So this part of the project was actually done manually, with everyone on the project group taking turns to upload and enter metadata throughout last summer and into the fall. Early on in the project, we did consider the option of automating the uploads and metadata entry using the Internet Archive Python tool. However, the group, when we sat down and we looked at it all together, we saw there was a real value in everyone participating in this step to sort of build and increase our own internal departmental knowledge on this collection. And I also just sort of as a sort of how this project was managed, I also wanted to mention that. So we used Microsoft Teams and more specifically the Microsoft Planner, which worked really well for us. So basically when one of these tasks in the workflow was finished, sort of the next group was tagged to let them know that it was their turn to pick up the project. And again, this was a really great way to work and run this project while some of us were working from home and others were on site. So finally, I'll come to some of the project outcomes and completed objectives. So in the end, we now know that these digitized publications are housed in an OIAS-driven digital preservation storage. They're stored in 2 different geographic locations within Canada and with fixity checking running 4 times a year. We also now have the advantage of having these files stored in standardized apes, bringing more consistency to how they're organized at our department. We also now have a clear handle on where the preservation copies live for all of these digitized items. And secondly, the second objective was obtained by making these holdings both more accessible and visible to researchers than had previously been on our archives website. And we've been able to really aid and guide more archival researchers and be able to provide better reference services and support to researchers since these have been on the Internet Archive. I also wanted to mention that we've already seen that it's had sort of an unexpected side effect in that a few offices at Concordia are starting to offer RMA their materials, and they're really interested in having them added to our Internet Archive collection. So I think that that's a nice testament that the goal of having this collection more visible is kind of working. And we've also actually, and this was sort of an unexpected outcome at the time, but our collection has recently been added to the Internet Archive Canada, which we're hoping that should help pushing the visibility of these collections even further for Canadian researchers. So I'll end on this note, which I think is important, and sort of another unintended consequence of this project, that it allowed the archive staff that don't normally work together on projects to kind of come together and work more closely and collaborate on a new type of digital project using new tools, whether it be Archivematica, the Internet Archive, or even Microsoft Teams. It really helped the entire group move forward together using these new digital tools. And it also helped us learn together, but it also forced us to troubleshoot together as a group, all while we were kind of working, some of us were working from home and some of us were working in the office. So I thought I'd just kind of finish on that note, that it was really interesting and kind of a new way to work for our department. So I think that was something really, it was an unintended consequence and an unintended outcome of this project, but it worked really well. So on that note, thank you. And here's the URL if anyone's interested in checking out the collection in a bit more detail.